Everything. We're a day off now, but we are still making videos, gosh darn it. Quick Kickstarter update. We are at 53%, I want to say, of my goal. There are less than 14 days left, which is terrifying and exciting. So my dad gets sent to boarding school, and he doesn't just get sent to American boarding school somewhere possibly exciting. He gets sent to boarding school in the middle of nowhere, Canada, which is how you know you're really bad. So all growing up we hear all these stories about going to boarding school, about how the crazy antics that happen in the dorms, and how the food was awful, and they once got served tongue and apparently rebelled, and they were these like huge, sweeping, epic stories worthy of their own film, each of them. And so finally one summer my grandparents decreed that we, my family, and my aunt and uncle had to go to Canada, back to North Bay, which was where my dad went to boarding school. And my great-grandparents are buried, and beautify their graves. On the way there or back, we were also going to stop in Toronto. So that was going to be the awesome part of the trip. Not awesome part was the boring trip to North Bay. We get there, and we go to the boarding school, and we talk, and my dad just is like, there's the rock that we used to sit across from school and smoke at. And there's where I would cut people's hair on the front lawn for money. And the stories got bigger, but the trip it had a lot of ups and downs. Toronto was amazing. I love Toronto, I still do. And North Bay was interesting. It's a really small town, and there really isn't a lot there happening, but it was interesting seeing my dad back where he had gone to boarding school. Well, about 5 years after this trip, where we all know and now have seen and we can visualize this boarding school, my mom reveals to me that what sounded like 2 years of boarding school my dad attended actually was about 3 months. In the end, what that revealed to me is basically that my dad was a fairly epic storyteller. This didn't really have a point. I had one, which was why I was like, I got a point! Monica, start filming! Didn't have a point in the end.
Ramble. When the subject of summer vacations came up, the first thing that left my mind, stuff, was family summer vacations when I was young. And growing up in Seattle, our summer vacation was the time that we went to my dad's hometown in southwestern Montana. The trips were both good and bad. The best part of the trip was usually the 10-hour drive out and the 10-hour drive back because of my dad's storytelling, and he would tell us all these huge, crazy stories about growing up. What I remember most is always thinking that he had to be embellishing things, that he could not really be telling me the truth on a lot of this stuff, because he was telling me one day about how he was this crazy ski jumper, and according to him, he had this rivalry with this kid in the neighboring high school, and that they always would come up against each other in high school sports, but skiing was where they really kind of did all kinds of nutty things, and there was always crazy accidents, bad accidents, like the night that he spent with a car on his chest in a ditch, and every time that he exhaled, the car lowered down on him a little more. Stuff like that, where you're like, oh my god, and then what happened? And he had scars, but the weirdest one is this rivalry that he had against this kid, Bobby Knievel, who of course grew up to be Evil Knievel. Now, I kept going, no, really. He's like, no, really, I know Evil Knievel. And this was when Evil Knievel was huge. And he really did. He did all of this stuff, and he really did have a rivalry with Evil Knievel. The moral of my story is that the whole time I thought he was exaggerating, he probably really wasn't. Because when my dad died, we had to take his remains back to Montana to bury them. and we wound up in this little bar. And, well, I'm sitting in this bar in Polaris, having a beer, start talking to the wizened old bartender. And they do this thing in rural Montana where they ask you your name and try and figure out if, if they know any of your people. Anyway, he's like, oh, Jeannie Stone, I remember the time when him and his brother knocked a boxcar off the tracks behind the bar. And I'm like, what? And I'd heard this story, but had completely dismissed it as hyperbole. It's like, oh, yeah, they knocked that clean off the tracks. They were in big trouble. I'm like, how does that even happen? His brother and him were like 10 and 12. They were like my son's ages. I literally cannot fathom this. So anyway, that's where I kind of went. Every single story my dad probably told me was probably undersold, and he is epic in my mind to this day. Tell us the stories the real life stories that happened to your parents that once you heard them once, you wanted to hear them over and over and over again, that they became kind of your family mythology. And have a wonderful week, and hopefully we'll get our act together and actually post on Tuesday next week.
Yay!